G'day. I'm going to answer the question, will my kids be worse off than their parents? 4 out of 5 young Australians between 18 and 24 expect to be financially worse off than their parents. And this is because I watched a news report dated a few months back. The panel was earnest and the concern was genuine. One of them even said, young people need relief because it's just so hard to save. The other one pointed to HECS, soaring rents, the cost of living, even climate change. And I sat there nodding all along at most of it. And then music arrived in my head. Yeah, from a song I've known since the late 80s. From the band Mike and the Mechanics. The song was The Living Years. And there was a lyric in there that I've never been able to forget. So profound. The observation that every generation blames the one before. I think there's a lot of truth in that one. So it wasn't a verse, wasn't a sermon, though the band was singing with a boys' choir in that video. I thought that was quite interesting. It's just the songwriter noticing something the writers of Proverbs would have recognized immediately today. Now I want to be careful here. The financial pressures of young Australians that they're carrying out, they're real. HECS is real. Rental is real. The gap between wages and property prices in this country, it's something that would make your eyes water. It's just way too much of a gap. But I want to ask the honest question. What's really worse off compared to exactly? Is it compared to a generation that bought a house in the 60s on a single income? Yeah, sure. But it was also a generation with no superannuation safety net for the first 20 years of their working lives. There was no internet to find work, no ability to reach a potential employer on the other side of the world without it costing a week's wage in phone calls. That's how expensive it was to communicate with someone on the other side of the world. Can you not see? Every generation gets handed something difficult. The difficulty just comes in different packaging, you see. Now I know this because I graduated directly into it. I'm talking about the recessions of the 1990s. Yeah, I mean right into it. It took over a year looking for full-time work, and especially not in the field I studied for. Employers weren't interested. And so the degree I had sat there technically complete, but practically irrelevant. Of course, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? I took whatever I could get those jobs, even though they were still hard to find. Yeah, I ended up as a cleaner. I have to tell you, there were moments in that season where I wondered whether the plan, to graduate, find a job, had worked at all. Let me cross the road first here. As a result, I packed my bag, filled up my suitcase and I left. 2 years overseas. It was Singapore as it happened. I worked pretty hard. I kept the lifestyle tight. I definitely saved. And when it was time to come home, I came home with a savings which I might have never had if I stayed put. Yeah, it wasn't inheritance money, but guess what? It was enough to buy a used car and pay off my HECS. Now, I thought that was a pretty good deal, don't you? And I don't tell you that because to sound impressive. I tell you that because every generation has its version of hard. And then once you came through it, not unscathed but standing, were almost never the ones who waited for conditions to improve. Right? No one was waiting for perfection to arrive. Which brings me to something Jesus said that I need you to hear properly. It's from Matthew chapter 10, verse 30. But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. What a beautiful verse. Jesus is talking about sparrows when he says this. Oh, let me cross the road again. Great. Yeah. He sold, two of them were sold for a penny in the market. They were cheap and disposable, right, these sparrows? Nobody keeps count of sparrows, and yet not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father. And then this. What about this one? This one's even better. The hairs of your head are numbered. Now I know that verse can arrive as a pleasant religious sentiment. It can sound that way. The kind of thing you could cross-stitch on a cushion and stop actually hearing. But I'm asking you to hear it differently. Think about what Jesus is actually claiming. Because in the middle of Roman occupation, there's economic instability. There's a world where ordinary people had no idea what the next decade would hold. And in that world, he says, God knows the count of your hair. Not approximately, not in broad strokes, but everyone was numbered because he's God. He knows it all. And the anxiety I'm hearing from young Australians right now has two flavors. The cost of living version, which is real, it's immediate and it's grinding them. And the AI version, which is saying, will there be work for me? Will a machine take what I've trained for? I understand that anxiety. I lived a version of it. You hear me, heard it before in other videos. Contracts were not renewed. Industries restructuring. Skills that felt permanent suddenly feeling fragile. So hello, that's not new, right? Let's go further back in time. The Industrial Revolution said the same thing to a different generation. And so did the internet. In fact, every technological disruption looked from the inside like the moment the rules finally and permanently changed. And then new categories of work appeared that nobody had named yet. We're going to see that soon. And the people who looked at change and asked what's possible, not only what's lost, found new ground. And that's what you've got to keep thinking about. God has never been surprised by any of those transitions. I don't think any one of those. Remember, even the hairs of your head are numbered. Okay, so there's something I haven't told you about my time in Singapore. Something I've been thinking about more than the savings balance. Because during those 2 years, there are plenty of moments where I genuinely did not know what's coming next. I had work, but the plan beyond that was loosely held. Because I had my girlfriend back in Australia, you see. I didn't know exactly where home would be or what it would look like when I got back. I was managing what was in front of me and trusting that the rest would resolve. What I had, and I see this clearly looking back, was the conviction that stewardship was my part of the deal. That's right. Taking what was in front of me and being genuinely responsible with it. The outcomes weren't mine to engineer. That's not a lesson I've mastered. It's one I keep returning to, because the temptation and uncertainty is always to grip harder, to attempt to control outcomes that were never in your hands to begin with. And here's a question. Does it make any sense that God numbered the hairs on our head in the comfortable seasons and lose track during the difficult ones? What do you think? So here's what I want to say directly. If you're a young Australian watching this, carrying the weight of HECS and rents and the cost of groceries and that creeping fear that AI is coming for whatever you've trained for, I'm not here to dismiss that. Not at all. I'm not here to ignore it. But I want you to hear this, and I mean this as a friend. So it's not a lecture. Conditions have always been hard, differently hard. Hard in ways the previous generation couldn't prepare you for because they didn't know what it was coming either. But what doesn't change across any of those conditions is this. The principles of stewardship are not seasonal. Please, build a spending plan where times are tight. Save something, even if it's small, it doesn't matter. Save it towards an emergency fund. Avoid debts you can't sustain. You give generously when every instinct says to hold back. These are not luxury practices available only to people whose income is comfortable. Oh no. They are how you hold things together when the ground is uncertain. And remember, the recession of the early 90s wasn't kind to me or to many of my classmates. But what I took away from it, the discipline, the willingness to adapt, the readiness to go where the work was. I've drawn on that for decades since. I would not have nominated for that education, but I never stopped being grateful for what it gave me. Yeah. So that's all I want to say for today. I hope it's been helpful. Now don't forget, if you like this video, subscribe to it, give it a thumbs up, and share this with your friends. Take care, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.